Okay, so for those who've been in my sessions before, I love it when you guys respond and interact. So feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have like a question, a contribution. I love it when you guys are participating in the lesson. So I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
And I'll also be monitoring the chat. So if you don't want to speak up and you have
They want what I
something
put.
okay, so I'll be monitoring the chat in case you have something to say, but you don't want to unmute, you can type it in the chat. You can also raise your hand. I'll be paying attention to those things. Okay, so as usual, just to remind you guys, there's a new format of the SAT. So all of the textbooks, I haven't seen any new textbooks so far. So all of the textbooks that you have for SAT are based on the old SAT. So it's important that you know basically the changes that have been made so that you don't waste time on something that is not even on the new SAT. So far we've been focusing on the questions that are in the new SAT practice tests. We've been going through SAT practice test 1 and the reading and the writing section. So far for reading, we started with the main idea. We looked at what the main idea is, how to find the main idea. We did a bunch of practice questions. And then we went to function. We looked at what function is, how to find the function of the passage, and we did a bunch of examples. And then and then the last reading session we looked at evidence, and that's where we ended. So today we'll be moving on to the next topic. In case you missed out on any of those, don't worry, we will go back at some point, just for the sake of revision. So in case you weren't there, don't worry, we'll still go through that. And also the sessions that we've had are all available on our YouTube channel. So all the resources are there in case you need any. So for today, we'll be focusing on literal comprehension questions. And I want to show you an example just so you know the kind of questions that we are dealing with. So as I always emphasize, for the reading and the writing section, they've combined the sections into one. So it won't tell you like, okay, this is a writing question or this is a reading question. So you have to be able to decipher that by looking at the question. And also, I always emphasize for the reading, you have different kinds of questions. So you can't risk approaching every question the same way because you won't be able to get the answer. So you being able to tell like this is a function question is really going to help you, which is why I want us to this is why I want to show you like the kind of question I'm looking at today. So for instance, question 4 over here would be a writing question. It's asking what the most precise word choice is. Writing is all grammar, so that would be a writing question. But number 7 asks you what the main purpose. So this is the main idea question. Question 8 asks you for the function. This is a function question. Move on to question 9, asks you for the function, obviously function. Main purpose, question 11. Question 12 is an example of a literal comprehension question. So as always, I'm reminding you that the strategy that I see has worked best is reading the question before looking at the passage, because if you've already read the question, you're going to know what to look for as you read the passage. Because if you go in normal order, you would read the passage, read the question, and then go back and read the passage. So to save yourself time, it would be a good idea to do that first. So read the question first, see what it's asking, so that the moment, like even the first time you read through, you'll be able to find the answer. So literal comprehension are literally literal. So these are questions that don't have any twist in them. They don't ask you to like decipher anything. They're literally asking you what is the passage saying, right? They give you excuse me. So they give you a passage and asks you, and this question asks you according to the text, sorry, what is true. So just like get the information from the passage. So initially thinking about it, this question should be very simple and it should be very easy for you to get the answer because they're literally asking you what is true based on what has been said. So you don't have to find the function, the main idea, you don't have to find the tone, the attitude, nothing like that. It's just asking you what is said according to the text. So they seem very easy firsthand, but also they wouldn't have been on the SAT if they were too easy, because SAT is meant to test basically how ready you are for college. So if they were too easy, they would not even be on the SAT. So what I'm trying to say is, even though it seems pretty straightforward, there's still a lot that you need to know about literal comprehension questions. You need to be very careful as you like pick your answer. And so, yeah, we'll go into the little things, the little details about these questions next. But just keep in mind that even though it seems like straightforward, there's still a lot that can go wrong, and there are a lot of ways that the college board tries to mislead you as well into like picking the wrong answer. So that's what we look at. Okay, so that's what we'll look at next. And can you guys see the literal comprehension? Just making sure.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. Okay, so as usual, if you miss something, you want me to repeat, just let me know. Or yeah, okay, this is a good size. Okay, so we're looking at literal comprehension. I already showed you an example of a literal comprehension question. So these are questions that directly ask you about minute passage details. So they won't ask you to find the main idea, anything complicated. It just asks you what is said in the passage. So it will either ask you what did the author say or what happened in the passage. So these, as I said, should be the simplest question, but they tend to have like some twists that can mislead you into picking the wrong answer. So the first thing that I want you guys to know, of course, for you guys, it's very simple because you have a short passage. Initially, I would be warning you about like putting the wrong details or something like that and looking at the right part of the passage. But you guys have such a short passage, it's hard to miss the detail that the answer is about. So I want you to keep in mind that the passage is the keychain. It's very easy to read the question and then try to answer it from your own memory of the passage. Of course, you guys have a very short passage, but it's also very easy to like pick an answer because, oh, when I read something about this. And in that way, you can be misled because it's not like the college board is going to put options that are not from the passage. You get what I'm saying? Everything A, B, C, and D will be from the passage because yeah, it's meant to mislead you. It's not going to be some off answer that will like make you laugh, in how wrong it is. It's going to be something that's actually in the passage. So if you start relying on your memory or like, oh yeah, I thought, yeah, there was something that would have made me think that, the moment you start to go beyond what has been given in the passage, or the moment you get something small that was given to you and you try to like get something more out of it, then you miss the point completely. So I always emphasize that the SAT is a standardized test. And so it's nothing about opinion. It's not about you finding that detail that maybe no one else would have found. Like it's straightforward. So keep in mind that the passage has the answer and only the passage has the answer. These questions, they're literally asking you what happened, what did they say? So there's no point where you have to like reason or like, you don't have to do much. You just have to find why it is in the passage. So I want you to think of it in that way. Like they've given you this sentence with a hole in it, and you're basically just looking at the passage and trying to fill it up. And so it's very important that you are really relying on the passage. Even if you go back to the passage 3 times, it's fine as long as you find the detail that you have. And you guys don't even have a long passage, and so it's not even going to take you a lot of time to do that, which is why it really help you to read the question first, because then you are serious, like you are literally looking for the answer. You already know what the question is in mind. So always keep in mind that you really have to look at the passage. Okay. So this is a very important point again. Don't trust your memory. Make sure that you look back at the passage because wrong answers will have details from the passage, but maybe just not the right ones. So that's why you need the question in mind for you to be able to look at that, which is what we'll look at next. But again, keep in mind that there's details, there's correct details from the passage in the other option. Okay. So always go back to the passage, rely on the passage. Don't like really overanalyze the question and try to come up with some conclusion. That would become your opinion. So you're just looking for the portion of the passage that gives you the answer. Okay, then the next part is for you to find the key. Okay, so these questions are very specific, meaning they'll tell you, like that question, that example we looked at, it said like something about what is true about mothers. So they've told you what the topic is. You're looking for something about mothers. And so it makes your job very easy because you already know what you're looking for before you find it, which is why you need to read the question first. So this is the point. Find the key first and know exactly what you're looking for as you look at the answers. If you need to keep like stating it in your mind as you read, like, oh, true mothers, what's true about mothers? If that helps you to keep the question in mind, that will also be very helpful. But the point is, don't forget what you're looking for and then get the wrong detail in the process. So that's a very cardinal part. Like, always have the question in mind, keep the idea in mind as you look for answers. And like I said, these are very specific. So also remember, like, how specific the question is what's supposed to help you to find the answer. So always be sure to keep that in mind as you go through. Okay. Any questions so far?
No,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right. Okay. Okay. So first thing, find the key first. Know what exactly you're looking for before you look at it, because there's going to be all these other details that do not answer the question. So you're filtering them out by keeping that question in mind. And then the next thing is finding answers. Okay, so you know what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's true about mothers. So the thing about the SAT as well, it's not going to be like a third grade comprehension exam where like you find an answer word for word, exactly the way it's supposed to be. So that's where your thinking comes in, because the answer that you're finding is supposed to rephrase whatever you have, right? So we looked at finding the key and then going to the passage. So you read the question, you read through the passage, and you find, oh, what's true about mothers is that they are very caring. Okay. And then you go to the answers. Now you're trying to find what your answer is. Keep in mind that it's going to be a restatement of whatever information that you found. So it's not going to be word for word. You will not find that on the SAT. But you have to also make sure that you are very specific as you filter out your answers. This is where the trick comes in, right? Because imagine you have a very short paragraph of the passage. It's wrong. It's very hard for you to miss the details. So what are they going to do? They're going to give you answers that are partially right and partially wrong. And that's why you need to pay attention. On the SAT, even one word is enough to make an answer wrong, right? Just one word that adds more information, removes some information, makes it more accurate. Imagine there's a passage talking about traffic lights, and I'm saying, and this passage is about traffic lights in Zambia because I'm from Zambia. So I'm like, oh, traffic lights are really loved in Zambia. They are amazing, and people can't live without them. And then one of the answer options says, traffic lights are loved like in all countries, right? That's going to be wrong. This is a very it's not a very good example, but the point that I'm saying is even generalizing something further than it has been generalized in the passage is wrong, right? Just them changing the word some countries to all countries will make the answer wrong. So always keep that in mind that even one word is enough. So you have to be very specific. You have to pay attention to detail. And there'll be no point, and this applies to all sections. There'll be no point where you have to like make a concession and be like, okay, but this answer is at least better than the others. Like, even though some part is wrong, like it's still better. Like you will never ever have to do that. So if at some point you find yourself doing that, it's either you haven't read the question right or you're looking at the wrong details in the passage. But an answer that's correct is going to be 100% correct. So that should guide you as you look through the answers. So always be sure to make sure whatever answer you choose is 100% correct. There should be no part of it that's wrong, and that's based on the passage. And there should be no part that's not given to you in the passage. Okay, so that's your approach. When you find these questions, read the question and keep in mind that that's what you're looking for as you go to the passage. After you read the passage and find your answer, then you can go to the options. So this is the approach that I've been advocating for a very long time. It's very important that you find your answer before you look at the options. Because like I said, there will be other answer options that already have passage details, but they are wrong, right? So if you already know exactly what you're looking for, it's very hard for you to be misled by those things. So this doesn't only apply to literal comprehension. I also emphasize this for main idea questions, function questions, that you have to find your answer first before you look at the questions, because that will keep you from it will even save you a lot of time. Instead of you having to disqualify A, B, and C before you find that D is your answer, you already know your answer. And so you're just like filtering, oh, A is wrong because, oh, B is wrong because. So it will really save you a lot of time. Okay. Any questions up to here?
No, miss, I understand it.
All right.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so the next part is the traps that mislead most people. I've already mentioned them, but I'll still go through just to like emphasize what you should avoid as you go through these questions. Okay, so wrong answers will usually contain outside details. And this is maybe in case you have a science passage or something, and there's something that's kind of obvious because you've done science before, but it's not given to you in the passage. That's never going to be the right answer. So the other details are not going to like jump at you unless you already have the right details in mind as you look at the options. So this is the importance of you already having an answer, because if you know that all the passage said is that traffic lights are great, and then you read through the answer, and then one option tells you, oh, people love traffic lights because they add atmosphere. I don't know. So it's already added something, a reason which wasn't given to you in the passage, right? So if you have the right idea in mind as you look at the options, it will be hard for you to be led astray. And like I said, they'll pick common knowledge that most people know. And it would seem, I don't know, it would be easy for you to like add that to your opinion of the passage instead of paying attention to what you read. So always keep in mind that the passage is all you know. There's nothing else that you know in the reading section apart from what's given to you, because that's what makes the SAT a fair exam. The fact that everyone has an equal chance of getting the question right. So never add outside information. Next part is making assumptions. It kind of goes in the same line as there being outside details, but this is just going too far in restating the information by making a far-fetched conclusion. So again, it would be kind of like the example of saying some countries love traffic lights and then saying all countries love traffic lights. Like you're going too far based on the information that has been given. So again, you won't have to make a conclusion at any point, your personal conclusion or anything of that sort. Whatever is given to you in the passage, that's it. Like just focus on restating what has been given in the passage. And then for 3 extreme answers, so for inference, I already mentioned this example, some of them apply a conclusion to a larger group than the passage says. So always pay attention to the audience, even within the passage. And it's important to pay attention to answers that are extremely negative or extremely general, like answers that say all people or no people. Pay attention to those, because most of the time the passage doesn't imply that all people are, under that conclusion. So always pay attention to extreme answers, because most of the times they're wrong. So yeah. And then you also have wrong details. So some questions just completely go off topic. And even though maybe they might have a name or some words from the passage, they just completely have information that's not even there. Or maybe it is in the passage, but it just doesn't even answer the question. So remember that you are looking for something that answers the question, not for something that's in the passage, because you're going to have questions that have the wrong details from the passage. Okay, so this lesson has a lot of repetition, because it's just the same point being made all over again, that you should make sure that you focus on the passage and you pick an answer that doesn't have outside details. So here's your list of do's for your literal comprehension questions. Number 1 is pay attention to the specific information that the question is asking for. So like that one is asking us what is true about mothers. That's a specific piece of information, and there's only going to be one right answer that has that information. And then secondly, depend on the portion of the passage that talks about the subject of the question. This would mostly apply to the previous version of the SAT, because then you had like 95 lines of the passage. For this one, the passage is so short that most likely all of it talks about the subject, which is maybe the person or the topic that's like in discussion. But still, the specific information that's being asked will guide you to either like a specific sentence in the passage. So this part is just saying, make sure you find the portion of the passage that answers the question. And then lastly, be detail oriented as you go through the questions. I already said this, that even one question is enough to make an answer wrong. So you really need to depend on, you really need to be very specific as you pick your answer, because it has to be 100% correct. Okay. So that's about literal comprehension questions. Is there anything before we do some practice questions?
Nothing, ma'am.
All
Nope.
right. Okay, great. So we'll start with the same example that we looked at. Okay, and it's asking us, according to, sorry. Okay, it's asking us, according to the text, what is true about mother? And the top here is there for a reason, so don't skip it. It might have information that's not given to you anywhere else, or information that helps you to understand the passage. So this is adapted from a novel that might help us. Okay, and it's The Railway Children. So I'm going to read through, and I'll read through the answer options. And I want you guys to really pay attention, because we already know what the question is asking. What is true about mother? And then we're going to see which option has the right information. Okay. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dour visits to dour ladies and sitting dourly at home waiting for dour ladies to pay visits to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them to do their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea, and she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions. So what is true about mother? A, she wishes more ladies would visit her. B, birthdays are her favorite special occasion. C, she creates stories and poems for her children. D, reading to her children is her favorite activity. So what do you guys think?
Choice C. She
C? Yeah.
creates poems and stories for her children.
Okay, C. Does anyone have a different answer, or do we all agree with C? Okay, great. So I hope you guys see that all the options have something that's actually in the passage. A says the talks about ladies visiting her, and there's something about visits, right? Visits to ladies, waiting for dour ladies to pay visits to her, right? There's a lot about visits. B says birthdays are favorite occasion, and we know birthdays. She wrote poetry for birthdays right there. And then C talks about stories and poems. We have stories. She used to write stories, funny pieces of poetry. D says reading to her children is her favorite activity. And we know she did read, she read them aloud after tea, right? So I definitely agree with C, because it doesn't make any conclusions. It just states what is stated, right? She creates stories which were told up here. Besides this, she used to write stories. And then she always made up funny pieces of poetry. So she definitely created poems and stories and poems, yeah, for her children. For A, it takes information that's there. It would be an example of an off-topic answer, because this part says she didn't. This is in the negative. She didn't spend her time waiting for ladies to visit. She didn't spend her time just like waiting, And so this is wrong information based on the passage, right? Even though there's something about ladies visiting, it's saying she didn't spend her time. So if you didn't like pay attention to understanding that part, it would be easy to go for A as an option. And then for B, it says birthdays and other great occasions. And it doesn't say anything about her having a favorite occasion or anything. It mentions birthdays and she made poems. So it would be easy to kind of jump to that conclusion, but it doesn't say that. So it's wrong. D says reading to her children is her favorite. It doesn't talk about her, like it being a favorite activity. Yes, she used to do it, but where does it say it was her favorite? So this is an example of how like specific you need to be as you go through. So yeah, that was great. See. Okay, so let's see if we can find another literal. This is main purpose. So that's main idea. Okay, that would be evidence, infographics. This would be evidence too. This is writing. Writing as well. Writing too. Yeah, it seems like it's looking like the last portion is all writing. So let's see the second section. Most precise, that's writing. Most precise. Main purpose. Okay, here we go. Oh no, this would be inference. This is main idea. Okay, here we go. Question 11. Kind of, it's long, so I have to zoom in. Okay. So the question is down here. It says, based on the text, how does the Lord Chancellor respond to the crowd? So how does he respond? It says the following text is adapted from Lewis Carroll's 1889 satirical novel, Sylvie and Bruno. A crowd has gathered outside the room belonging to the warden, an official who reports to the Lord Chancellor. So this is an example of how this is very important context and it can help you understand the passage. And we're looking for how he responds to the crowd. One man who was more excited than the rest flung his hat high into the air and shouted, as well as I could make out, "Who roar for the sub-warden?" Everybody roared, but whether it was for the sub-warden or not did not clearly appear. Some were shouting bread and some taxes, but no one seemed to know what it was they really wanted. All this I saw from the open window of the warden's breakfast salon, looking across the shoulder of the Lord Chancellor. What can it all mean? He kept repeating to himself, I never heard such shouting before, and at this time of the morning too, and with such unanimity. Okay. A says he asks about the meaning of the crowd shouting, even though he claims to know what the crowd wants. B, he indicates a desire to speak to the crowd, even though the crowd has asked to speak to the subwarden. C, he expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands, even though the crowd's shouting annoys him. D, he describes the crowd as being united, even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise. So what do you guys think?
Same C.
C,
Yes, ma'am.
do you agree with C, or are there any other opinions?
I got evidence.
Sorry?
I got evidence.
Oh, okay. We'll come to that. So is everyone for C? Okay, was that you, Audie?
Yes, ma'am, it's me.
Okay, you can go ahead and defend option C.
All right, let me first reiterate what C says. He said he
Mhm.
expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands, even though the crowd's shouting annoys him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we can prove that the crowd shouting annoys him with the final line, with such unanimity. Unanimity means a large group of them. And it says, and at this time early in the morning too is an explanation that means it's a sign of rage.
Mm-hmm.
And it says it's sympathy. It says, what can it all mean? Repeating to himself, it means he's contemplating, which means he's concerned. End of statement.
Okay. Yes. So I definitely see what you're saying. I think part of it is the definition of the word unanimity. I had to check because initially when I saw the word, I thought it means united, but I wasn't sure. So the meaning of um unanimity is agreement by all people or a consensus. So it basically means like the crowd was united. I mean, a huge part of this is that it's asking how the Lord Chancellor responds to the crowd. So we have to basically filter through everything and find the point when we see the Lord Chancellor responding. And so it says, a crowd has gathered outside, and an official who reports, sorry, a crowd has gathered outside the room belonging to the warden, an official who reports to the Lord Chancellor. Okay, so we know the first part is about this man roaring. Everybody roared and did not clearly appear. Okay, some were shouting taxes, some were shouting bread. And then this says, all this I saw from the open window looking across the shoulder of the Lord Chancellor. Okay, and this was his response right here. What can it all mean? He kept repeating to himself. I have never heard such shouting before, and at this time of the morning too, and with such unanimity. So this is basically saying like, why are people shouting? They've never shouted this much, and they shout like their shouting sounds united, like they're shouting the same thing. So this was basically the chancellor's response. So I want us to go through the options and then see. So A says he asks about the meaning of the crowd shouting, even though he claims to know. So he does ask about the meaning. So this is an example of how something can be partially wrong, partially right, right? A says he asks about the meaning, which he asks, what can it all mean? But then he doesn't claim to know what the crowd wants. So I think this would come from not really understanding who is speaking, because this part is talking about the person who was reporting to the chancellor, and then this is him speaking. And then B says he indicates a desire to speak to the crowd. Let's see, I'm trying to remember if there was an element of that. Let's see, high into the air, whether it was for the subordinate. Yeah, there's nothing that even talks about wanting to speak to the crowd. And here it says that, oh yeah, the last part says, even though the crowd has asked to speak to the subwarden, and there was a point, let me find it. All this are so excited, make out, everybody roared. I remember reading a part about them going to the warden. Everybody roared. Anyway, yeah, that part doesn't, it's not the chancellor who responded in that way. So B is out. C says he expresses sympathy for the crowd's demands, even though the crowd's shouting annoys him. So I don't see any sympathy in this, because just like, what does it mean? I've never heard such shouting in the morning. He seems kind of annoyed, yes, like from the words that he's saying, but it doesn't outright say he is annoyed, and we don't see any sympathy. I feel like, see, the word sympathy is what kind of throws it off. Yeah, but definitely it does seem like the crowd shouting was annoying him. So let's look at D and see. D says he describes the crowd as being united, which is here with such unanimity, even though the crowd clearly appears otherwise, which they do, right? This part initially says they were shouting bread, some are shouting bread, some are shouting taxes. No one knew why they were roaring. So this last part is basically the rest of the passage, and he does describe the crowd as being united. So what do we think now? C, D? Do we agree with D, or does anyone disagree?
That's fine. I get it.
Okay, so it was just one simple word, the word sympathy.
Same here.
Okay, great. So this word sympathy kind of throws it off. Everything else is correct, right? He did seem to be annoyed, but we don't see him expressing sympathy for the crowd's demands. So it's just those little details that could easily like throw you off, but you need to pay attention to like everything. Make sure your answer is 100% correct. Okay, question 12 looks more evidence. It seems from these examples that we've looked at, there's just like one literal comprehension question. Though this is definitely not the standard. I hope they release like a statement about how, exactly how the sections are going to be for the new SAT, because at this point, everyone's just speculating. So yeah, I'd like us to do one more. So let's do College Board practice test 2. And I guess we'll do the one, since there seems to be one example in each, we'll do the one example. Okay, can you guys see the practice test 2?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. So let's find the literal comprehension. Is writing, logical, main purpose, function. Inference. Here we go. Question 11. Okay, so it says, in 2014, Amelia Cohn and her team at NASA, oh, sorry, I forgot to read the question. The question says, according to the text, why would the helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly to Mars? So something very, very specific. Why wouldn't the helicopter be able to fly to Mars? And we don't have any introduction at the top, meaning we don't need it. So that also emphasizes the fact that if you're given an introduction, you need it. There's a reason it's there. Okay, so it says, in 2014, Amelia Cohn and her team at NASA set out to build a helicopter capable of flying on Mars. Because Mars' atmosphere is only 1% as dense as the Earth's, the air of Mars would not provide enough resistance to the rotating blades of a standard helicopter for the aircraft to stay aloft. For 5 years, Cohn's team tested designs in a lab that mimicked Mars' atmospheric conditions. The craft the team ultimately designed can fly on Mars because its blades are longer and rotate faster than those of a helicopter of the same size built for Earth. And it's asking about, so why would a helicopter built for Earth be unable to fly on Mars? A says, because Mars and Earth have different atmospheric conditions. B says, because the blades of helicopters built for Earth are too large to work on Mars. C says, because gravity of Mars is much weaker than the gravity of Earth. D says, because helicopters, D says, because helicopters built for Earth are too small to handle the conditions built for Mars. What do you guys think?
I think it's A.
Okay, great. We have an A. Do we all agree with A? Or is there any other opinion?
Yes, choice A.
Okay, A. Great. I definitely also agree with A. And this is also an amazing example of how small details can be manipulated into making you go for the wrong answer. So A is correct because what the explanation comes on the density of the air, right? It won't provide enough resistance for the aircraft to be able to fly. So that's to do with the atmospheric conditions. So this shows you, this is how it's been rephrased. It doesn't say because Mars and Earth have different densities of air. It's been rephrased as atmospheric conditions, but we all know that's still the same thing. It's basically a correct generalization. So it's not going to be word for word, as I mentioned before, but it's still the same thing, just rephrased. Okay, so let's look at B. So what's wrong about B is that it gives the wrong information, right? It says because the blades of helicopters built for Earth are too large. But we see in the example that, what is that? The craft can design. So it says they can fly on Mars because blades rotate faster. So it's basically are longer and rotate faster. So this part says Mars is the place that needs longer blades, not Earth. So this one gets the information but makes it wrong by switching. It says the blades are too large instead of it saying the blades on Earth are too small or too short, sorry, for Mars. So yeah, this would also have been a right answer if it contained the correct information, because that would be the reason. Like it would need longer waves, it would need to rotate faster than what's built on Earth. If you look at C, this is an example of outside information. We all know the gravity on Mars is weaker than the gravity of Earth, but nowhere in the passage has it said that. So that means that for this passage, you don't know that the gravity of Mars is weaker. And then D says, because the helicopters built for Earth are too small, there's nothing about, let's see, does it say anything? Because blades are longer and rotate faster. Yeah, it doesn't talk about a size change of any kind. So D would be wrong. So details are very important. Yeah. Do we have any questions here before we move? Okay. So let's see. Find another one. Main idea. Yeah. We keep seeing the same pattern, right? Like just one question. One literal comprehension question. Okay. It seems to be around the 11th position. Function, yeah, question 9. It says the following text is adapted from Oscar Wilde's 1891 novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is taking his first look at a portrait. I forgot to read the question again. My bad. The question says, according to the text, what is true about Dorian? And the title says, the introduction says, this is from a novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is taking his first look at a portrait that Howard has painted of him. So we know the context. He's looking at the portrait and we're looking for what's true about him. Dorian passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned towards it. When he saw it, he drew back and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Howard was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. So what is true about him? A, he wants to know Howard's opinion of the portrait. B, he is delighted by what he sees in the portrait. C, he prefers portraits to other types of paintings. D says he is uncertain of Howard's talent as an artist. So what do you guys think?
Second choice, B.
B? Great.
Yes, ma'am. B.
Are there any other opinions? Okay, yeah, I definitely agree with B, right? That's all we see. Like he looked at it, he was so surprised about his own appearance, about his own beauty. Yeah, so let's disqualify the rest. A says he wants to know Howard's opinion of the portrait. There's a part, where is it? He stood there motionless. He didn't know Howard was speaking to him, so he definitely wasn't listening to Howard. He didn't want to know his opinion. B says, oh, we've already looked at B. C says he prefers portraits to other types of paintings. So it just says he loved this portrait because it was himself. It doesn't say that he loves portraits compared to other types of paintings. D says he's uncertain of Howard's talent as an artist. I don't think there's anything that even implies this. This is just completely off topic. Okay, so yeah. So I'm loving the participation. And this is basically, I thought we would have more examples to do, but it seems like we have a pattern of just like one question for each type of passage. So this is basically what we are supposed to do today. Just look at literal comprehension. I think you guys have gotten the gist. We've looked at a bunch of things that you shouldn't do. So just to reiterate the main ideas, we said the first thing you should do is read the question and know exactly what you're looking for. Keep that in mind as you read through the passage. And then as you read through, look for the accurate information. When you find it, go and read the options and be very detail oriented as you go through the options. Because like we saw in the previous example that we did, just one word can make a question wrong. So make sure that you are paying attention. And there's always going to be one answer that's 100% correct. So if you find like even one detail that's not accurate, leave it behind. Go and look for another answer because that's not going to be the correct answer. So do we have any questions based on what we've covered today?
No, Mrs. All clear.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll leave the last time that we have up to you guys. If you want us to end early, we can. If you want us to go through some questions from the last topics that we've covered in reading, I mean, function, main idea, we can do that as well. So what do you guys want to do? Do you want to practice different types of questions or do you want us to end early?
I'd prefer we end a little early because,
Mm-hmm.
well, because I'm really pinned right now. So yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, let me ask it in this way. Is there anyone who wants to continue? Okay, so I'll leave it open in case you need to leave. That's okay. I'm still recording this session, so I'm going to post it on the YouTube channel. And if you want to like come and watch the last part of the session, it will definitely be uploaded. But if you want to stay, also feel free to stay. We'll be going through some questions. Okay. So I'm pretty sure we covered most of, if not
Oh,
all of
yeah.
the.
I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna cut the short.
Okay.
I have an urgent emergency.
All right.
Thank you
Oh,
for your
I hope
session
everything
and
is okay.
time. Wait,
Sorry.
wait. Thank you for your session and time. I
Oh
understand
yeah,
perfectly what you've been saying.
that's great. I hope everything is okay. Okay, so we'll continue. So far we've covered main idea and function, and I just want to basically very roughly go over what's needed for function and main idea, and then we'll look at some questions. And also, if you need to leave like in between, that's definitely okay. Since I'm recording, I'll upload it, so you can definitely still go back and listen. Okay, so see, trying to move the chat around. Okay, so question 9 asks us for the function. The word function is just the way we use it in normal language. It's asking you why something is there. What do you use it for? So the function of any passage is to convince you of some idea. I like thinking of it as like a debate, right? You have the opposing, the proposing side, and there's this argument, and your job is to convince the audience that your side is right. So every passage that you read, think of it as the author trying to convince you about something. And so everything that an author says, the function is to convince you of that idea that they're trying to put forward. And the idea would be like the motion of the debate, the topic of the debate. And so you can't think about function without thinking about the main idea, right? You need to know, what is this passage about? Because that's what the author is trying to convince you about. And everything that's asked about function has to be connected to the main idea, right? Imagine I have a, what example can I give? Imagine I'm standing in a room. Let's say I'm standing in a room, and you ask me, oh, what are you doing in this room? Like, you can't know what I'm doing there unless you know what's going to be happening in that room. Like, let's say that was a classroom and there's a class that's going to be happening. That's why I'm there. But if you don't know that there's class there, then you won't know why I'm there. I mean, that's a very lame example, but the point is that you have to know the context for you to be able to figure out what the idea is. Okay, so always think of that. The first thing that you should do when it comes to function is find the main idea, because everything has to be connected. The function of everything is tied to the main idea. So it says the following text, oh sorry, starting from the question. I need to get used to doing that. Okay, it says, which choice best describes the function of the underlined passage in the text as a whole? So we're looking at this entire passage and picking out in this passage, what is the function of this little text. And remember that function goes beyond stating what it is. So that will make sense when you go through the options. But the introduction up there says, the following text is adapted from Indian Boyhood, a 1902 memoir by Ohiesa Charles A. Eastman, a Santi Dakota writer. In the text, Ohiesa recalls how the women in his tribe harvested maple syrup during his childhood. So we have the context. He's recalling how maple syrup was harvested. And they're looking for the function of the sentence. So it says, now the women began to test the trees, moving leisurely among them, axe in hand, and striking a single quick blow to see if sap would appear. The trees, like people, have their individual characters. Some were ready to yield up their lifeblood, while others were more reluctant. Now one of the birchen basins was set under each tree, and a hardwood chip driven deep into the cut, which the axe had made. From the corners of this chip, at first drop by drop, then more freely, the sap trickled into the little dishes. Okay, so I want us to do this one together, and then the next one will be you guys. Okay, so we've come across this. What's the first thing we do? Remember, the main idea is very important. So that's basically what the motion of this passage is. And we know it's about the harvesting of maple syrup. And the first sentence is normally where you would find the main idea, just because of how short this passage is. So even when you're starting a comprehension, you don't just start out of nowhere. then I fell down. Like you're going to say what was happening, what day it was, and that context is what you're going to need for you to figure out what the function is. So we know the first sentence is basically telling us the process, like the women have the axe in hand, they strike to see if the sap is going to fall. And then this sentence says the trees, like people, have their individual characters. Some are ready to yield up their lifeblood, others were reluctant. Okay, so let's look at the options. A says it portrays the range of personality traits displayed by the women as they work. B says it foregrounds the beneficial relationship between humans and maple trees. C says it demonstrates how human behavior can be influenced by the natural environment. D says it elaborates an aspect of the maple trees that the women evaluate. First of all, we need to understand what the sentence is talking about, and we can't do that without context, right? Remember, it said these women are striking a blow to see if sap is going to appear. So it's talking about the trees. These women are striking the trees. And then it says the trees, like people, have their individual characters. So basically, when they strike the tree, some of them would remove sap, others would not. That's what this sentence is saying, right? So A is completely wrong because it moves to personality traits when that's not, I mean, that's not what's being talked about. So you also need to understand what's happening in this sentence. It says the trees like people, but the trees are the focus. So it's not talking about personality traits at all. B says it foregrounds the beneficial relationship between humans and maple trees. No. The key to this is the sentence before. We're just talking about striking the trees. C says it demonstrates how human behavior can be influenced. Completely wrong. We're not talking about humans. D says it elaborates on an aspect of the maple trees that women evaluate. Sorry, that the women evaluate, which is true, right? It says the women were hitting them, some would release sap, some wouldn't. So that was an aspect of the trees, right? And that's what makes D correct. You wouldn't be able to get that if you just read D alone. Like if you just read the sentence without reading the first part and keeping the main idea in mind. So always be sure to pay attention to the context and make sure that your answer is actually giving a function. Yeah. So do we have any questions here before we move? Okay, so that was function. That was question 9. Then I want us also, we looked at that question, the main idea. Okay, so I've already mentioned the main idea as like the motion of this debate that the author is trying to convince you of in his debate speech, right? So now how do you find the main idea? So I mentioned briefly that you would find it most likely in the first sentence. The main idea is basically what is being talked about in the passage. We always use the formula topic plus so what. So if you were to look at this passage, what is being talked about? What is the subject? In this previous passage that we looked at, we know it's the trees. The trees are what are being talked about, them being cut and whatnot. So if you look at the passage, the topic is the most mentioned word in the passage. Basically the subject, what is being talked about, right? So once you get the topic, you now have to figure out what is being said about it. So it's basically a very short summary of the passage. Like we know in this previous passage, if we were to summarize it, we'd say the topic, we have the topic are the trees, and then what is being said about them, that they're cut. Okay. And that's it. So it just basically tells you the main thing that is being said, just like the name implies, it's the main idea. What is being said about whatever is the topic of discussion. So always keep in mind that for you to find the main idea, you need those two things. What is the topic? What is being said? And we do this also as an example, and then the rest of them will just be practice. So it says in West Africa, sorry, question is, which choice best states the main idea? In West Africa, jails have traditionally been keepers of information about family histories and records of important events. They have often served as teachers and advisors too. New technologies may have changed some aspects of the role today, but jails continue to be valued for knowing and protecting their people's stories. So we know what the topic is. Sorry, I think I misread this wrong. Family histories. These are Jalis, not jails. My bad. So the main topic is Jalis who keep information about family histories and records. And we know up to the end, we're still talking about these Jalis. So the topic is the Jalis. Now, what is being said about them is, so basically this passage is talking about the functions of the Jalis, right? They keep the information, they serve as teachers and advisors. New technologies have changed, yes, but Jalis are valid for keeping information. So if I was to summarize this into one idea, I would say Jalis are important for information. So let's go through the options. A says, even though there have been some changes in their role, Jalis continue to preserve their community's histories. This has accurate information. Let's look at the others. B says, although Jalis have many roles, many of them like teaching best. No. There's a part about teaching, but this is very wrong. There's no part that says that they like teaching. C says, Jalis have been entertaining the people within their communities for centuries. I don't see anything about entertainment there. D says, technology can now do some of the things Jalis used to be responsible for. Now, this one is an example of something that the College Board uses to mislead you, right? It takes one sentence, which is this part. It says new technologies may have changed and tries to make it the main idea. But remember, we said the main idea is a summary of the entire passage. It has to have information that's talked about throughout the passage. Otherwise, it's not the main idea. Okay, so for this one, A would be our answer. Because the main thing that's being said is that they preserve their community's histories. Okay, so now we're going to do 13 as a practice question. It's asking us for the main idea. It says, in 1934, physicist Eugene Wigner posited the existence of a crystal consisting entirely of electrons in a honeycomb-like structure. The so-called Wigner crystal remained largely conjecture, however, until Feng Wang and colleagues announced in 2021 that they had captured the image of one. The researchers trapped electrons between two semiconductors and then cooled the apparatus, causing the electrons to settle into a crystalline structure. By inserting an ultra-thin sheet of graphene above the crystal, the researchers obtained an impression, the first visual confirmation of the Wigner crystal. A says, researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the existence of the Wigner crystal. B says, researchers have identified an innovative new method for working with unusual crystalline structures. C says, graphene is the most important of the components required to capture an image of a Wigner crystal. D says, it's difficult to acquire the image of a Wigner crystal because of the crystal's honeycomb structure. So just from what we've read, does anything stand out? What do you think? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so that was a lot of information. So let's try to break it down and see if any answer makes sense, right? So remember, what is the topic is what is being said or what's talked about the most. And we know this is the Wigner crystal, however I pronounce it. Let's say the crystal. This crystal is the topic of the passage because that's what's being talked about from the beginning. All right, Eugene Wigner confirmed the crystal, so-called conjecture, the captured, the crystal, everything is about the crystal, crystalline structure, and crystal. So crystal is the crystal is the topic. Now, what is being said about it? Let's try to like sort of skim through the passage, right? The first sentence talks about the structure. Second is no one had an image. And then researchers trapped electrons, ultra-thin graphene among the crystal. They obtained an impression. So basically the whole thing is talking about them trying to find an image of the crystal and them trying to like create that structure. That's what's being talked about throughout. I can already eliminate one, C, because it only talks about something that's in one sentence, graphene above the crystal. So it takes one sentence and tries to make it the main idea, just like, which example did we have? Just like D, took one sentence and tried to make it the main idea. So C is definitely out. So looking for an answer that talks about how the crystal, it talks about crystal structure, basically. Yeah. So now, what do you guys think? A, B, or D?
I'll go with D.
D. Okay. Everyone agree with D? Okay, so let's analyze. D says it is difficult to acquire an image of a Wigner crystal because of the crystal's honeycomb structure. So let's see. The honeycomb structure stands out to me. I don't remember seeing that. Let's see. The so-called Wigner crystal remains largely conjecture. They hadn't captured an image. The researchers trapped electrons between two semiconductors, causing electrons to settle ultra-thin sheet of graphene. So this little detail, remember how we said just one word is enough to make an answer wrong. So we have the honeycomb aspect of it, entirely of electrons in a honeycomb structure. Yeah. So we're not told that this is the reason that they could not have an image of the crystal. Yes, we know it's in a honeycomb-like structure consisting of electrons, but maybe it was hard to get an image because of the electrons. And yeah, so yeah, it remained hard and stuff and so on. We don't hear much about the honeycomb structure being the reason. So let's look at B first. B says researchers have identified an innovative new method for working with unusual crystalline structures. This is too general, first of all, because they're just trying to find the structure of this specific crystal. So let's look at A. A says researchers have obtained the most definitive evidence to date of the existence of the crystal. A makes sense just because even from the beginning, it says someone someone like suggested the evidence. And then this remains largely conjecture, meaning it's just like speculation. No one has seen it, and now they've seen it. So it's like the whole passage kind of comes together talking about how this crystal exists. So A makes sense, and it's also the only one that has accurate information. Everything else has something that's not either not accurate or only from one little line and not really capturing like the main essence of the passage. Yeah. So do we have any questions? Okay, so let's see. This is infographics, evidence. Yeah, this should be it. So let's go to the second and we do those questions too. It was writing. Okay, so we have a function question. And the question itself says, which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion in the text as a whole? According to historian Vicky L. Ruiz, Mexican-American women made crucial contributions to the labor movement during World War II. At the time, food processing companies entered into contracts to supply the U.S. Armed Forces with canned goods. Increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, many of whom were Mexican-American women. Employees insisted on more favorable benefits, and employers who were anxious to fulfill the contracts complied. Thus, labor activism became a platform for Mexican-American women to assert their agency. So we're looking for the function of that specific sentence in the text as a whole. And A says it elaborates on a claim about labor relations in a particular industry made earlier in the text. B says it offers an example of a trend in the World War II era economy discussed earlier in the text. C says it notes a possible exception to the historical narrative of labor activism sketched earlier in the text. B says it provides further details about the identities of workers discussed earlier in the text. Okay, so before we go through like the details, does any answer already make sense? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so it's also a lot of information or at least compared to the last questions, a lot of information to filter through. So let's see. Remember that we're trying to find the context, and to do that, we need the main idea. So let's see what is being talked about. There's a historian, and here it says the crucial contributions to the labor movement of Mexican women in World War II. This is basically the topic, the contribution, women contribution. At the time, food processing companies entered into contracts to supply the US with canned foods. So here now we're talking about made contributions. Okay. So there's canned food being prepared, increased production, greater bargaining power, many of whom were women. Increased production quotas conferred greater bargaining power on the company's employees, better bargaining power on the employees. Okay. So employees insisted on more favorable benefits, and employers who were anxious to fulfill the contracts complied. So basically they were doing so well that the company's employees were getting better offers from other places. And so employees insisted on better pay, and employers were very anxious to keep them there, so they paid them. So labor activism became very important. Okay, so let's go through the options. A says it elaborates on a claim about labor relations in a particular industry made earlier in the text. Let's see. So what is this claim that would be talked about? Processing companies entered into contracts, canned foods, increased production quotas, increased. Yes. So this is basically elaborating further on what has been said. So let's keep A. We'll come back to it. B says it offers an example of a trend in the World War II economy discussed earlier in the text. So this is not an example, just because this is a new point that was brought up to elaborate. There hasn't been any other it's not like it says employees got better conditions. For instance, they requested better food or they requested higher salaries, right? It's actually explaining more on what has been said, which is what the full colon means. If you've paid attention to like punctuation in the writing section, it's meant to show that there's like a deeper explanation that's following. So, okay, C says it notes a possible exception to the historical narrative. This is not an exception. D says it provides further details about their identities. No, nothing about identities. So A makes sense. So the first part is basically saying employees had higher bargaining power and they insisted on favorable benefits. So it's basically explaining how they had increased bargaining power. Yeah. So are we okay? Are there any questions on this one? Okay, let's see. Yeah. Oh, we did question 9. If I look familiar. Okay, so we'll do question 8, function question. Oh wait, let me see if there's a main idea question first. Evidence. Okay, so I don't see any main idea, so we'll do the function, which it involves both, so it's a good way of practicing both main idea and function. Okay. The following, sorry, I always forget to read the question. It says, which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text as a whole? It says the following text is adapted from Zora Neale Hurston's 1921 short story, John Redding Goes to Sea. John is a child who lives in a town in the woods. Perhaps 10-year-old John was puzzling to the folk there in the Florida woods, for he was an imaginative child and fond of daydreams. The St. John River flowed a scarce 300 feet from his back door. On its banks at this point grow numerous palms, luxuriant magnolias, and bay trees. On the bosom of the stream float millions of delicately colored hyacinths. John Redding loved to wander down the water's edge and, casting in dry twigs, watch them sail away downstream to Jacksonville, the sea, the wide world, and he wanted to follow them. Okay, so looking at the function of this specific sentence, we need to know the context of this. And we know that John is a child who lives in the woods. So that's the context. So we know John is the topic. What is being said about him is, of course, he's in the woods. So he loved daydreams. There's a river that flowed. On the banks were amazing things, blossom strings. Okay. And then this part is saying John, who is our topic, he loved to wander down the water's edge and casting in dry twigs, watch them sail away downstream. Okay. A says it provides an extended description of a location that John likes to visit. So it's not describing the location, it's describing like this activity that John likes to do. So A is out. B says it reveals that some residents of Johnstown are confused by his behavior. So there's nothing about confusion. Of course, that was strange. He just like puts twigs in the water and watches them float away. But it doesn't talk about residents and their reaction. C says it illustrates the uniqueness of John's imagination compared to the imaginations of other children. Let's see. Yeah, he would see the sea. He was actually looking at these things, so it doesn't say anything about imagination and other children. It doesn't say anything about other children. D says it suggests that John longs to experience a larger life outside Florida woods. Yes, definitely, because it says he was looking at the twigs and he loved to watch them sail away, and he wanted to follow them into this wide world. Excuse me. Okay. So D makes sense because it's the only one that even gives accurate information. Plus, initially, all of this was saying he was fond of daydreams. So it does connect to the rest of the passage in that it's basically saying he loved to dream. Though he was in these woods that were nice, he still wanted to basically leave the woods and explore the world outside. So D would make sense as an option. Okay, so that's it in terms of function and main idea questions. Practice is very, very important. So make sure that as much as you can, you go through questions. And after you go through questions, be sure to also analyze your question paper. Like, be sure to go through and see, why did I get this question wrong? What made me pick this answer? Because then you're actually working on the errors that you made and you're actively getting better because you're reducing your errors. Yeah. So anything before we end the session? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording.